The air was thick with the scent of smoke and charred wood, remnants of a fire that had long since faded, but whose whispers still haunted the village like an ancient memory. The faint crackling of dying embers echoed through the valley, as though the earth itself was mourning the loss of something once pure. Beneath the low, mournful skies, the village stood, forgotten by time and shrouded in an eerie silence that stretched over the land like a heavy veil. It was a place that seemed to belong more to the shadows than to the light, a place where legends were born, where the veil between the living and the dead had been torn long ago. And it was here, in this forsaken corner of the world, that the blood oath had been made. The story begins with a man, the father, a man who had once been a simple farmer, a man who had never known the weight of darkness in his life. He was a man who believed that the earth beneath his feet was all he needed to sustain him, a man who thought the world could be shaped by his hands alone. But the fire had changed him. The fire had taken everything: their home, their hopes, their sense of safety. It had left nothing but ash in its wake, and with it, something else, something far older than any flame. On that fateful night, as the fire consumed the world around him, he had been forced to make a choice. His family was no more than silhouettes in the smoke-filled air. His wife, his children, all caught in the blaze. His heart beat in time with the crackle of burning wood as he knelt before the altar of his desperation. In that moment, in the suffocating heat, a whisper came to him. It was not a voice of human origin, nor was it a sound born of any earthly realm. It was a voice that seemed to come from the very earth itself, from deep within the bowels of the ground, from the places where light never touched. "I can give you what you seek," the voice murmured, low and seductive, like the rustle of dead leaves in an abandoned forest. "Your family can live. Your house can be rebuilt. But the price will be steep." The father's hands trembled, his mind clouded by the desperate need to save what remained of his life. His children were crying. He can hear them, their small voices lost in the crackling roar of the fire. And his wife, her face twisted in the terror of the unknown, her hands reaching out to him. He would not lose them. Not like this. "I will pay any price," he whispered into the smoke-filled night, his voice breaking under the weight of his words. The earth seemed to sigh, the wind stirred, and the fire suddenly roared louder, as if in response to the agreement he had just made. A dark shadow crept from the edges of his vision, an indistinct shape, too large for any human form. He did not see it, but he felt its presence, cold and oppressive, as though it were watching him, waiting for him to realize the true depth of his choice. And then, there was a sensation, a sickening chill, as though the air itself had turned to ice. A mark appeared on his hand, just beneath his palm, a brand that seared into his flesh, burning with a strange fire of its own. The pact was sealed. As quickly as it had begun, the fire died down, leaving behind only smoldering ruins. The shadows receded, but the man was not alone. The earth that had whispered to him still hummed with the ancient presence. His family, miraculously spared from the flames, stood before him, their forms shrouded in the same eerie twilight. They were untouched by the inferno, their clothes crisp with soot, but their faces pale as though something more than fire had passed through them. The father did not see it at first, the change that had taken place in them, in him. But as the days wore on, and as the days turned to weeks, he began to notice the subtle differences. His wife, once lively and full of warmth, now seemed cold, her gaze distant, as if she were staring at something beyond the world. His children, who had once been full of life and laughter, now spoke little, their eyes heavy with a sadness that could not be shaken. And the house, though rebuilt, felt wrong, as if it were no longer his. The walls seemed to shift in the corner of his vision. The floors creaked with the footsteps of unseen things. And at night, the wind howled louder, as though something in the distance was calling. The blood oath, though made in the heat of desperation, had not been without consequence. It had promised salvation, but the price was steep indeed. For every soul saved, another would be bound. The curse of the pact ran deeper than the father had ever imagined. And now, it was not only his bloodline that was doomed, it was the village as well. Rumors began to spread through the valley, whispered in hushed tones by the elders, and passed from one generation to the next. People spoke of a family cursed to forever walk the earth between life and death, neither fully alive nor fully dead. They spoke of strange occurrences, the flickering of lights at odd hours, the strange shadows that seemed to follow them wherever they went. And there were those who swore they had heard the Father's voice late at night, calling out to the earth, asking for forgiveness, but receiving none. But the true horror, the true cost of the oath, was yet to be realized. As the years passed, the Father's health began to fail, his body weakening as if the pact had begun to drain him. The land, once fertile and full of life, began to wither, its crops dying in the field before they could even be harvested. The animals, too, seemed to suffer, no longer thriving, but slowly wasting away. The earth that had once provided had now begun to take. In the silence of the night, the father would sometimes hear the whisper again, the same voice from all those years ago. It was no longer a comfort. It was a threat, a promise of something far worse to come. And it was in the depths of that silence, amidst the fading whispers of the curse, that he realized the true nature of the pact he had made. The earth had not been offering him salvation. It had been offering him something else, something far darker, something that had long been forgotten by the world of men. In the end, the father would learn that no oath, no matter how desperate, could escape the consequences of the forces it bound. The pact had not saved his family. It had doomed them all. And the ashes of that long-dead fire would remain, their marks etched into the bones of the earth forever. The village had long since grown accustomed to the strange happenings that now clung to the air, like the dampness of a forgotten tomb. The wind, once a familiar whisper through the trees, had become a mournful wail, carrying with it the secrets of the past. The people who remained in the village, those few who had not fled in the wake of the fires, spoke of the family with hushed voices, casting wary glances at the crumbling walls of the house. It was as though the curse that had taken root in the earth had spread outward, touching everything, like the tendrils of some ancient vine, slowly choking the life from all who came too close. Among those who remained were the daughters of the damned, the two sisters who had been spared by the fire. Raised in the shadow of their father's pact, they knew nothing of the world beyond the walls of their home, nor of the weight of the darkness that lay hidden beneath their every step. They had grown up in a house filled with silence, their mother's voice now little more than a ghostly echo in their memories. Their father, too, had become a figure draped in mystery, his once warm gaze now hollow and distant. What had happened to them, to their family, had never been fully explained to them. They had only known that they were different, marked somehow by the curse that had claimed their bloodline. The older sister, Elira, was the first to notice it. She had always been the more perceptive of the two, her sharp eyes catching the smallest of details, her senses heightened by the strange atmosphere that had grown thick in the air. She was no longer the carefree child who had once run through the fields, laughing beneath the sun. The weight of something dark had settled over her like a shroud. And the years of living in that house, in that village, had begun to take their toll on her. She had grown quiet, withdrawn, her once bright eyes now dimmed with the weight of too many unanswered questions. Her younger sister, Vela, was different. She was still filled with the spark of youth, her laughter ringing through the halls of the house like a bell that could not be silenced. But even Vela could not ignore the unease that settled in her chest every time the wind howled outside, or when she caught sight of their father staring blankly into the fire, muttering words she could not understand. It was as though he were searching for something, but the answers eluded him and them, just beyond their grasp. One evening, as the sisters sat in their dimly lit room, the weight of the silence between them was unbearable. Vela, her small hands folded in her lap, watched her sister with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Elira had not spoken in hours, and her gaze was fixed upon the window as though she could see something beyond the pale moonlight that bathed the world outside. "Elira." Vela's voice broke the silence, soft but persistent. "What is happening to us? To this place?" Elira's eyes flickered toward her sister, and for a moment there was a shadow of something. Fear, perhaps, or doubt, flashing across her features. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. There were so many things she wanted to say, so many questions that burned inside her, but none of them had an answer. "We are not like other people," Elira finally said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "You feel it too, don't you? That presence? The one that watches us from the shadows? It's as though we are being hunted, Vela." Vela's eyes widened, her heart quickening in her chest. She had felt it too, the unshakable sense of being watched, the chill that crept into her bones when she stood too long in the silence of the house. But she had never voiced it, never allowed herself to acknowledge the truth of it. "I don't know," Vela admitted, her voice trembling. "But it's always there. It's like something is waiting for us. Or for you." Elira's gaze dropped to her hands, her fingers curling into fists. "It's not just waiting for me, Vela. It's waiting for us. The curse, the pact our father made, it's come for us. It's why we were spared from the fire. We are the ones meant to carry it." Vela felt a shiver run down her spine. She had heard the rumors, the whispers of the curse that haunted their family, the stories that had been passed down from one generation to the next, though no one had ever dared to speak of them directly. There had always been something unsettling about the way the villagers looked at them, something that suggested they knew, perhaps even feared, the truth of who and what they were. "But why?" Vela asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why us? Why not the others? Why are we the ones cursed?" Elira's gaze turned toward the window again, her eyes distant. "Because we are the last of the bloodline. The oath our father made, it's binding. We cannot escape it, and it will not let us go." For a long time, neither sister spoke. The weight of Elira's words hung heavy in the air, pressing down on them both like the very darkness that seemed to have seeped into their bones. The wind outside began to howl, rattling the shutters of the house, and the sound of it seemed to carry something with it. A voice, perhaps, or a faint, mournful cry. It was then that Elira stood abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "We need to know the truth," she said, her voice steely with resolve. "We need to go to the old church, It's the only place that might hold the answers. It's where it all began. Vela stood as well, her heart pounding in her chest. The church was the one place in the village that no one ever spoke of openly. It had been abandoned for as long as anyone could remember, its once pristine stone walls now crumbling with age. But Elira was right. If there was any hope of uncovering the truth, it would be there. The two sisters, bound by blood and by the curse that had marked them from birth, set out that night into the heart of the village. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly across the fields, and the wind carried with it the scent of something ancient, something that had not been touched by time. The church stood before them like a forgotten monument, its doors hanging slightly ajar as though inviting them to enter. Elira and Vela exchanged a glance before stepping forward, their footsteps muffled by the overgrown grass that had overtaken the path. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the faint scent of mildew hung in the air. The walls were adorned with faded frescoes, their once vibrant colors now dulled by years of neglect. But it was the altar that caught their attention, the altar that seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as though something terrible had once been offered there. Elira approached it slowly, her heart racing in her chest. "This is where it all began," she murmured, her fingers brushing against the cold stone. "This is where the oath was made." Vela stepped forward, her gaze locked on the altar. "But what are we supposed to find here?" Elira turned to her sister, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. The answer. The way to break it. But as she spoke, the wind outside began to howl louder, and the shadows in the church seemed to stretch, reaching toward them like a hand from the abyss. The sisters stood in the heart of the darkness, unsure if they were about to find the answers they sought, or if they were walking into something far worse. The wind, cold and biting, swept through the village as the sisters left the abandoned church behind them. They did not speak as they walked, their footsteps echoing in the darkness, each one a reminder of the weight they carried, the curse that had plagued their family for generations. The air felt different now, as though something ancient had awakened in the depths of the earth, something that stirred beneath the soil, hidden in the shadows of the land itself. It was Elira who spoke first, her voice low and filled with resolve. "We need to go to the hollow." Vela glanced at her sister, her brow furrowing. "The hollow? But that place, no one goes there." "I know," Elira replied. "But it's the only place left that might hold the answers. The whispers, they come from there. The old stories speak of it. The hollow is where the truth lies." The hollow was a place few dared to tread. It was located deep in the woods, far from the village, and was shrouded in an aura of dread. The trees there were twisted and gnarled, their branches clawing at the sky like the skeletal fingers of long-dead giants. The ground beneath was soft and uneven, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. It was a place where light seldom reached, where the very earth seemed to swallow sound, leaving nothing but silence and shadows in its wake. Yet, for all its foreboding nature, it was also a place steeped in legend. The elders of the village spoke of it in hushed tones, warning children never to venture near. They said it was a place where the veil between worlds was thin, where the restless spirits of the past still wandered, searching for the living to carry their burdens. And it was in this darkened grove, in the heart of the hollow, that Elira believed they would find the truth about their family's curse. The sisters walked in silence, their path lit only by the pale glow of the moon above. The trees surrounding them loomed like silent sentinels, their twisted forms casting long, dark shadows across the forest floor. The deeper they ventured, the heavier the air seemed to grow, thick with the weight of forgotten secrets. It was as though the forest itself was watching them, its ancient eyes hidden behind the rustling leaves. Vela shivered, her eyes darting nervously around the dense woods. "I don't like this, Illyra. It feels wrong." "I know," Illyra replied, her voice barely a whisper. "But we don't have a choice. The Hollow is the only place left where we might find the answers we need." As they pressed on, the forest grew quieter, the usual sounds of nocturnal creatures strangely absent. The only sound that remained was the soft crunch of their feet on the undergrowth, and the occasional rustle of branches as the wind whispered through the trees. But it wasn't the wind that caught their attention. It was the faint sound of something else. A voice. At first, it was so soft that Illyra thought she might have imagined it. But then it came again, clearer this time, a low, murmuring sound, like a chant carried on the breeze. The sisters stopped, their hearts racing in their chests, and strained to listen. "Do you hear it?" Vela whispered, her voice trembling. Illyra nodded, her eyes narrowed. "It's coming from the Hollow. That's where the answer is." With renewed determination, they pushed forward, their pace quickening as the voice grew louder, more insistent. It was a language neither of them recognized, a series of strange, rhythmic sounds that seemed to vibrate in the air around them, as though the forest itself were speaking. The further they ventured, the darker the forest became, until the trees were so thick that not even the moonlight could penetrate the canopy above. Finally, they arrived at the edge of the Hollow. It was as if they had stepped into a different world. The forest around them seemed to fade away, swallowed by an unnatural stillness. The ground beneath their feet was soft, almost spongy, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. At the center of the Hollow stood a great stone circle, ancient and weathered, its stones covered in moss and ivy. The voice they had heard was now louder, rising from the circle, echoing in the empty space. "Welcome," it whispered, though the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The time has come to face the truth." The sisters exchanged a glance, fear and curiosity in equal measure in their eyes. With a deep breath, Illyra stepped forward, her hand brushing against the nearest stone. As soon as her fingers made contact, the ground beneath them seemed to shudder, and a low rumble echoed from deep within the earth. The air grew colder, and the whispering voice grew louder still, until it became a chorus of voices chanting in unison. "Illyra!" Vela's voice cracked as she stepped back, eyes wide with terror. "What is this place?" "It's the source," Illyra murmured, her voice barely audible. "The source of the curse, the oath our father made. It all leads back here." The ground beneath them rumbled again, and suddenly, the stones of the circle began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter, until they blazed with a cold, eerie light. The air crackled with energy, and the sisters felt the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. The voice spoke again, this time clearer than ever, its tone commanding. "You seek the truth, but are you ready to face it? The bloodline cannot be cleansed without sacrifice. The price must be paid." The words sent a chill down Illyra's spine, and for the first time, she felt the weight of what they were about to undertake. The curse had never been truly understood, only whispered about in fear. But now, in this darkened hollow, the truth was beginning to surface. Vela took a step forward, her hand trembling as it reached for Illyra's arm. "What do we have to do? What is the price?" "The price is not ours to choose," Illyra whispered. "It was set long ago. A low, ominous rumble echoed through the forest, as the stones of the circle pulsed with an unnatural energy. The voices continued to chant, their words growing louder, more desperate. The wind picked up again, and the air grew heavier, as if the very atmosphere was pressing in on them. Suddenly, the earth beneath them cracked, and a dark, gaping fissure opened in the center of the stone circle. From the depths of the earth, something stirred, something ancient, something that had been waiting for centuries to be awakened. The sisters froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. They could feel it now. The presence, the ancient force that had been bound to their bloodline for so long. It was not just a curse, not just an oath. It was a creature, a force, something more powerful than they could have ever imagined. "We have to leave," Vela whispered, fear overtaking her. But Elira did not move. Her gaze was fixed on the fissure, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "No," she said softly. "We have to face it. We have to break the pact, or it will consume us all." The ground beneath them rumbled again, louder this time, as though the very earth itself was alive, waiting for them to make their final choice. And in the darkness of the hollow, with the voices chanting in their ears and the ground trembling beneath their feet, Elira and Vela knew that they had reached the point of no return. Whatever lay ahead, there would be no turning back. The hollow had left them breathless, their hearts echoing with the beat of something ancient and unfathomable. The whispers still clung to their ears as they made their way back to the village, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence of the woods. The weight of what they had witnessed in the hollow, the dark presence that stirred beneath the earth, pressed heavily on them both. They had come to seek answers, but instead they had uncovered more questions, each one more dangerous than the last. The ancient stones in the hollow had revealed nothing but the promise of a greater darkness to come, and the sisters knew, with a chilling certainty, that their journey had only just begun. Yet, even as the night pressed in around them, the true horror, the root of their family's curse, still eluded them. They knew it was tied to the pact their father had made, the blood oath that had damned them all. But the details, the true nature of the curse, remained hidden, buried beneath layers of secrecy and dread. Elira could feel it, the pull of something deeper, something darker, still lingering in the village. It wasn't just the forest that held the secrets to their fate. It was the church, the very place they had once avoided, the place their father had seemingly abandoned in favor of the dark forces that now haunted their family, the place where it all began. "I think we need to go back," Elira said, her voice thick with a strange, uneasy conviction. Vela looked at her, her face pale in the dim light of the moon. "Back to the church?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. "But, Elira, we already saw what's there. The altar, the marks. It's all just a memory of something terrible." "I know," Elira replied. "But I think the truth we're searching for lies beneath that altar. There's something about it. Something we missed. I can feel it." Vela hesitated, her fingers curling around the strap of her satchel as if trying to find the courage to step back into the very place that had sent a chill through her bones. And what if we're wrong? What if going back only drags us deeper into whatever nightmare is waiting for us? "We have no choice," Elira said, her voice resolute. "We've seen too much now. We can't leave without understanding it. If we don't face what's down there, it will never stop. We'll be trapped in this curse forever." Vela nodded slowly, a resigned expression crossing her face. She had always trusted her sister, had always followed her lead. And so, without another word, They turned back toward the village, the path winding before them like a dark promise. The church loomed in the distance, its silhouette stark against the night sky. The wind whispered through the trees, and the world felt strangely still as they approached the weathered building. The wooden doors creaked in protest as Elira pushed them open, the familiar, oppressive scent of mildew and decay greeting them once more. Inside, the church was even colder than before, the air thick with the weight of something long forgotten. The walls were lined with rotting pews, their once gilded carvings now faded and covered in thick layers of dust. The altar, dark and foreboding, stood at the far end of the room, its stone surface etched with symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. But it was the floor beneath the altar that drew Elira's attention. She could feel it now, the unmistakable sensation of something hidden, something buried beneath the surface. The ground seemed to hum with an energy that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She moved toward the altar, her footsteps echoing in the silence, and as she knelt down to inspect the floor, she noticed it. A faint crack in the stone, barely visible to the naked eye, running along the edge of the altar. It was as if the stone had been deliberately fractured, a hidden doorway concealed beneath layers of age and neglect. "Elira," Vela whispered, her voice tight with fear. "What are you doing? We shouldn't be here." Elira looked up at her sister, her eyes filled with an unsettling mix of determination and fear. "We have to see what's beneath this altar. Whatever lies hidden here is the key to breaking the curse. It's all connected." Vela bit her lip, uncertainty still clouding her features, but she stepped forward nonetheless. Together, they began to push against the altar, its weight heavy and unyielding. With a groan, the stone shifted, revealing the narrow crack beneath it. The sisters exchanged a glance, and without another word, Elira reached into the gap, her fingers brushing against something cold, something that sent a shock of ice through her veins. Slowly, she pulled it out. An ancient key, rusted and covered in the same strange markings that adorned the altar. "What is this?" Vela asked, her voice trembling as she took the key from her sister's hand. "I think it's the key to the truth," Elira replied, her breath shallow. "It's the key to the heart of the curse." The key seemed to pulse in her hand, as though it were alive, and the air in the church grew heavier, thicker with an unseen presence. The sisters turned, eyes wide, as they felt the shift, the subtle change in the atmosphere. It was as if something deep beneath the earth had awakened, and they were standing on the edge of something far greater than either of them could have ever imagined. "We have to go down," Elira said, her voice steady but full of an unspoken terror. "We need to use this key." Vela looked at the key in her sister's hand, and then back at the altar, her heart pounding in her chest. "Down where?" "There's something beneath the church," Elira explained. "It's the source, the power that holds our family in its grip. The key will lead us there." Vela shuddered, but nodded. She could feel the weight of their destiny bearing down on her like a stone, a force they could not escape no matter how far they ran. With trembling hands, Elira slid the key into a hidden lock in the floor beneath the altar, and with a soft click, the stone shifted. The ground rumbled beneath their feet, and the earth seemed to groan in protest, as though it were being disturbed after centuries of slumber. A section of the floor slid open, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. Elira hesitated for only a moment, her breath caught in her throat before she began to descend. Vela followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air grew colder as they moved deeper into the earth, the walls of the staircase slick with moisture and age. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the distant, echoing creak of the old wood that held the church together. At the bottom of the stairs, they entered a small chamber, its walls lined with shelves of dusty tomes and brittle scrolls. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, upon which rested a blackened object, a relic of some kind, its purpose lost to time. Elira stepped forward, drawn to it as though it were calling to her, and as her fingers brushed against its surface, the room seemed to shift. A voice, deep and guttural, filled the chamber. "You have come at last." The sisters froze, their blood running cold. The voice was familiar, yet foreign, a twisted echo of something they could not quite place. "Elira," Vela whispered, her voice shaking. "What is that? What have we done?" But Elira could not answer. She was transfixed, staring at the relic, as the chamber began to pulse with a dark energy, a force that seemed to reach out and wrap around them both. And in that moment, as the air grew thick with the presence of something ancient and unfathomable, they understood the truth. The curse was not just a shadow over their family. It was the very force that had shaped their existence, the force that had woven their fates into a tapestry of darkness. And now, they were at the heart of it all. There was no turning back. The chamber seemed to close in around them, as though the walls themselves were drawn inward by the dark presence that pulsed within the stone relic on the pedestal. The air, thick with the damp and decay of centuries, was now charged with a strange energy, an energy that seemed to beckon the sisters forward, urging them to uncover the next piece of the puzzle. But beneath the pull of curiosity, there was an undeniable fear that gnawed at their insides, a dread that whispered they were venturing too deep, too far into a darkness they might never escape. Elira's fingers hovered over the object, her heart hammering in her chest as the low, guttural voice reverberated through the stone walls. It was as if the chamber itself was alive, breathing with the same dark pulse that had first awakened in the hollow. The whispering voices from earlier, the ones that had seemed so distant, had now grown louder, filling her mind with fragmented images and disjointed memories. There were flashes of her father's face, twisted in agony, and fleeting glimpses of her mother, her features pale and ghostly, as though she had long since been claimed by the darkness. "Take it," the voice whispered again, its tone thick with a dark promise. "Take what is offered, and the curse will be broken." Elira's breath caught in her throat. She turned to look at Vela, whose wide eyes reflected the same terror Elira felt deep inside. "What does it mean?" Vela asked, her voice barely audible over the rising hum of the chamber. "What are we supposed to do?" Elira didn't have an answer. She felt as though the weight of the world had pressed down on her, her limbs heavy with the realization that they were standing at the crossroads of their fate. Everything, every moment of their lives, had led them here, to this dark place beneath the church, where the lines between the living and the dead blurred into one eternal shadow. "I don't know," Elira replied, her voice strained. "But this is the only way." She knew it, deep down in her bones. The offering, the one the voice spoke of, was not a simple ritual, not some hollow sacrifice. It was the heart of the curse, the source of the pact their father had made, and it had been waiting for them. The blood that had been spilled before, the blood that had bound their family to this darkness, had now come full circle. They were not just victims of the curse. They were its continuation. And to break it, to sever the bond that had ensnared them for so long. Someone had to be given. Vela took a step back, her breath coming faster now, her face pale with fear. No, we can't. We can't do this, Elira. But Elira was already reaching for the relic, her fingers trembling as they closed around its cold, smooth surface. The moment her skin made contact with the object, a wave of cold shot through her body, as though the very marrow in her bones had been turned to ice. The relic seemed to pulse in her hand, its dark energy seeping into her, filling her with a sense of power and dread that she could not explain. A vision flashed before her eyes. Her father, kneeling before the altar, whispering the oath that had damned them all. The earth trembling beneath them as they sealed their fate. The promise that had bound them to something far older, far darker than they could comprehend. This is what he wanted, Elira whispered, her voice thick with the weight of it all. This is the price. The price, Vela repeated, her voice a hollow echo. But it's not worth it. This isn't what we've come here for. I don't know if we have a choice, Elira said, her eyes locked on the relic, the dark symbols carved into its surface. It was calling to her now, the voices whispering faster, louder, urging her to complete the ritual. If we don't do this, Vela, if we don't make the offering, then the curse will continue, and it will never stop. We'll never be free. Vela shook her head, but her eyes were filled with tears. You don't understand. The curse, it's already taken us. It's inside us, Elira. We don't need to offer anything. We just need to break it, Elira interrupted, her voice sharp. She stood straighter, her hands clutching the relic tighter. We have to break it. This is the only way. Vela stared at her sister, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, as though the words were too much to bear. The weight of the decision hung heavily between them, and for a long moment, neither spoke. It was as though the world had stilled, the air holding its breath in anticipation of what would come next. The relic pulsed again, and Elira's fingers tightened around it. The whispers grew louder, becoming more insistent, more desperate. They were no longer just voices. They were faces, swirling in the darkness, their eyes pleading, their mouths open in silent screams. And in the center of it all, a shadow loomed, dark and formless, its presence pressing down on her like a physical weight. And then, with a sudden surge of force, Elira felt herself pulled into the vision. The earth cracked open before her, and she was falling into the darkness, surrounded by the cold, clammy grip of death. Her father's voice echoed in her ears, distorted and hollow. The offering must be made, Elira. The curse, it's the price we pay. Vela's voice broke through the darkness, trembling with fear. Elira! Elira snapped back to the present, the chamber around her suddenly too real, too tangible. She looked down at the relic in her hands, and then at Vela, whose face was now a mask of fear and uncertainty. We have no choice, Vela, Elira whispered. This is the only way. The curse, it ends here. She turned to the pedestal, stepping toward it with resolve, as though the weight of everything, the generations of suffering, the lost lives, the broken family, had built up in her, pushing her forward. There was no turning back. With a final deep breath, Elira placed the relic back onto the pedestal, and as her fingers withdrew from its surface, the chamber seemed to shudder, the ground beneath her feet trembling as though the earth was alive, awakening from a deep slumber. The air grew thick with power, and the shadows around them seemed to move, swirling like smoke. Vela took a step forward, her eyes wide with dread. Elira, What's happening? The relic began to glow, its dark energy spiraling outwards, filling the room with an oppressive presence. The air crackled with electricity, and Elira could feel the power that had been bound within the relic stretching outwards, wrapping around them both like a noose. She closed her eyes, willing herself to remain calm, to hold on to the hope that this was the right thing to do, that this offering would end the curse, would free them from the dark chains that had bound their family for so long. The chamber seemed to pulse with the force of it all. And then, with a sound like a final breath, the energy surged out in a wave that slammed into them both. Elira was thrown backwards, her body crashing into the cold stone floor as the room around her twisted and spun. She heard Vela scream, but the sound was distant, muffled, lost in the rising cacophony of power and darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Elira lay on the floor, gasping for air, her body shaking from the energy that had just consumed her. She looked up to find Vela standing in front of her, her face pale and stricken with terror. Elira, is it over? For a long moment, Elira said nothing, staring at the pedestal in front of her. The relic had gone dark again, its once glowing symbols now lifeless and still. The chamber was silent, the air thick with an unsettling calm. But inside her, Elira felt a shift. A weight that had once been pressing down on her chest now seemed to have lifted. "I think it's over," she whispered. But even as the words left her lips, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, some force, was still watching them, still waiting. The silence that enveloped the church felt alien to Elira. She had expected, hoped, for some kind of release. The feeling that the curse had been severed, the weight lifted, that the terrible bond had finally been broken. Instead, there was only the stillness, thick and suffocating, as though the world had held its breath and was waiting for something more. The air seemed dense, laden with a palpable presence that neither sister could name. Elira slowly pulled herself up from the cold stone floor, her body trembling from the lingering energy that had coursed through her when the relic had activated. Her heart still hammered in her chest, its rhythm uneven, as if something far older, far darker, was pressing against her soul. She turned to look at Vela, whose wide eyes still reflected the fear that clung to them, as though she too could sense the invisible watcher in the room with them. "I don't understand," Vela murmured, her voice trembling. "The curse, it should have ended. We gave the offering, Elira. We did everything right." Elira could hear the doubt creeping into her sister's voice, the uncertainty that had begun to cloud her once clear mind. "I know," she whispered, "but something's wrong. It feels like it's not over." As they stood there, the flickering shadows in the room began to shift, as though they were moving of their own accord, swirling around them with a life of their own. The temperature in the chamber dropped suddenly, the chills seeping into their bones. The quiet murmuring they had heard before, the faint, disembodied whispers, seemed to return, not as an echo, but as a presence. The voices, soft and insidious, slid into Elira's thoughts like oil into water. "You think you freed yourself, but the bloodline never truly escapes." She froze, her heart stopping for a moment as the words slithered into her consciousness. The voice, it was so familiar, but twisted, a distorted version of her father's. "Elira?" Vela's voice broke through the fog, but it sounded so distant, as if filtered through a barrier Elira could not cross. "What's happening?" Elira looked around, her vision clouded, the shadows now pressing in from every corner of the room. The walls seemed to close in on them, the space growing smaller, tighter, as though the church itself were responding to the presence that had stirred beneath their feet. She could almost feel the earth trembling again, as though something ancient, something buried deep within, was awakening once more. She couldn't shake the overwhelming sensation that something was watching them. Something with eyes that saw all, knew all, and that had been there, waiting for them to make their move. "Elira, what's wrong?" Bela's voice was sharper now, tinged with panic. But Elira couldn't respond. She couldn't tear her gaze away from the altar, which now seemed to pulse with a strange, dark energy. The glow from the relic had faded, but the dark force that had radiated from it had not. It lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, until Elira could no longer tell if they were coming from the walls or from inside her own mind. They were speaking directly to her, their words dark, cryptic, and unsettling. The offering was made, yes, but the price, it was never meant to be paid. You think you can change the past, but the bloodline is bound. You cannot undo what was done. It was not the church speaking. It was not some ancient force rising to confront them. It was something far more personal, far more intimate. The bloodline, the curse. And then, the realization hit her. This was not just the legacy of her father's pact, the one that had bound their family to the forces of darkness. This was something far more sinister. This was a watcher, an entity that had been lurking in the shadows, feeding on their suffering, on their family's misery. The curse wasn't just a curse. It was an existence, a living, breathing force, and it had always been there, in the background of their lives. Elira's breath caught in her throat, and she stumbled back, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She looked to Vela, who was still frozen in place, her face pale and drawn. "Vela, do you feel it?" Elira gasped, her voice rising with panic. "There's something here with us." Vela nodded, her lips trembling as she took a tentative step backward. "It feels like we're not alone," she whispered, her voice strained. "Like there's someone else here, watching us." And then it came. A figure, cloaked in shadow, stepped from the far corner of the chamber, its form barely visible in the dim light. At first, it was nothing but a silhouette, a shape that seemed to blend seamlessly with the darkness. But as it moved closer, Elira could make out a figure tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the gloom. Elira's heart stopped, and for a moment, the world seemed to fall away from her. She was back in that moment, standing in front of the altar with her father, a child once, watching as he made the blood oath that would bind them all to a fate they would never escape. This figure, it was not a stranger. It was not a creature of the forest or spirit from the past. It was their father. But it was not their father as they had known him. This was something twisted, something far darker. The air grew heavier, and Elira felt as though she were being suffocated by the presence of this thing, this shadow that was not merely a memory, but an active, malignant force. "You thought you could escape," the figure whispered, its voice a rasping echo of the man she'd once known. "You thought you could sever the bonds that bind us, but you were wrong. I have always been with you. I have always been watching." Vela took another step back, her breath shallow. No, this isn't real. It can't be." "It is real," the figure replied, its hollow eyes locking onto Vela, then Elira. "You are bound as I was bound. You are cursed as I was cursed. You cannot break free, not now, not ever." The realization hit them like a blow to the chest. This wasn't a mere apparition or fleeting shadow of their father's memory. This was something that had been with them all along, something that had been feeding on their bloodline, their suffering, and their pain. It had been watching, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And now, in this moment of reckoning, it was showing them the truth. They were not merely the victims of their father's curse. They were its inheritors, its chosen vessels. The figure smiled, a twisted, haunting expression that sent chills racing down Elira's spine. And now, it is time for you to take your place, it said, its voice growing louder, more insistent, as though it were rising from the depths of the earth itself. You are my legacy, my daughters. You are mine. No! Elira shouted, stumbling back, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. You're not him. You're not my father. You're something else. Something that's taken his form. I won't let you have us. But the figure's smile only grew wider, its eyes burning brighter as it stepped closer, its shadow stretching further and further, consuming the room around them. You will, Elira, it whispered. You will, because you have no choice. The shadows closed in. The air in the chamber thickened, like a living thing wrapping around the sisters, squeezing the breath from their lungs. The figure, once a twisted semblance of their father, moved with an unnatural grace, its dark presence filling the room, casting long, crawling shadows that clung to the walls like fingers trying to grasp at the very soul. Every step it took seemed to drain the warmth from the room, turning the stone beneath them cold, as though it were the last gasp of a dying world. Elira's heart thundered in her chest, and her mind raced. What had they done? Had they truly believed they could break free of the curse, sever their family's bond to the darkness? How could they have been so naive? You are my legacy, the shadowed figure whispered again, its voice a cold, rasping echo. Your father's blood courses through your veins. You were always meant to take his place. Vela gasped, her face pale as the truth began to crystallize. The horror was becoming clear now, undeniable in its cruelty. This thing, this twisted manifestation, wasn't merely a remnant of their father's decisions. It was the very thing that had been watching them, lurking beneath their lives. It was the curse itself, made manifest in their bloodline, a relentless force that would never relinquish its hold. No, Elira whispered, backing away. Her hands shook, and for the first time in her life, she could feel the weight of the past crushing her. We were never meant to carry this burden. We can't. This isn't our fate. The figure tilted its head slightly, an eerie smile spreading across its face, though there was nothing human in the expression. Oh, but it is, it crooned. The curse was never meant to end, Elira. The bloodline you seek to escape is eternal. The pact your father made has been passed down, woven into the very fabric of your being. You cannot break what has already been sealed. The words felt like knives in Elira's chest. She could feel them, the heavy weight of the pact pressing down on her. It was as though every breath she took was suffocating her. Every step she made was sinking her deeper into the darkness. But she couldn't let it take her. Not without a fight. With a quick, sudden motion, Elira reached for the relic, the same object that had ignited this journey. It still lay on the pedestal, its dark symbols now faintly glowing, like the fading embers of a long-dead fire. Vela, Elira said, her voice a steady force of will despite the dread closing in on her. The key. It's not over. The relic has to break the seal. It has to be the final step. Vela hesitated for a moment, her fear written across her face. But then she nodded, a flicker of resolve stirring in her eyes. She rushed to the pedestal, her fingers brushing against the cold surface as she lifted the relic, its weight heavier than she remembered. The air around them seemed to grow colder, the darkness thicker, pressing against them like a physical barrier. "What are we supposed to do?" Vela asked, her voice trembling as she looked up at her sister. "We don't even know how this works." "I don't know," Illyra confessed, her chest tight. "But we can't stop now. This is the only chance we have to end this. To end him." The figure laughed, its voice like the sound of nails scraping against stone, a cruel, hollow sound. "You are weak," it hissed. "You are bound to this fate, and no relic, no blood, no offering can undo what has been done. You think you can break a seal that was forged long ago? The blood of your father flows through your veins. You are mine." Illyra stood her ground, her resolve hardening. "No, we are not yours. We are not our father's mistakes." As the figure stepped forward, closing the distance between them, the air seemed to bend, warping around them. The relic in Vela's hand thrummed with dark power, its symbols flashing brighter, more urgent. "There's something in the relic," Illyra said, her voice rising with urgency. "Something, some way to break this. We have to focus on the seal, the blood, the sacrifice." The figure halted its advance, its smile faltering, as if it were suddenly unsure of what was happening. "What are you doing?" it hissed. "You don't understand. The curse cannot be undone. You cannot free yourselves." "Watch us," Illyra said, her voice firm, her hands reaching out toward the relic. Her heart raced as she could feel the relic responding to her touch, an ancient force, both terrifying and familiar. The relic's energy surged through her, sending a pulse of dark power through her veins. She could hear the chanting voices again, whispers from deep within the earth, the voices that had followed them, tormenting them, guiding them here. They were no longer whispers. They were commands. Illyra's hands trembled as the relic seemed to pulse in her grip, its power overwhelming her. She turned to Vela, her gaze steady but filled with the weight of what was to come. "Focus, Vela. We have to break the bloodline, the offering, the price. We have to break it all." Vela nodded, her breath shallow but determined. Together, they held the relic, the dark energy surrounding them, both a force of salvation and destruction. The shadows in the room grew more intense, more oppressive, pressing in on them like the walls of a tomb. The figure, the shadowed remnant of their father's pact, stirred again, its hollow eyes flickering with rage. "You think you can defy me?" it screeched, the sound like a burst of wind, a howling, guttural wail that reverberated through the stone walls. "You are nothing. You cannot escape me. You are bound." The relic pulsed again, its light flashing brighter. And for a moment, Illyra thought she saw the figure's form waver, its power beginning to crack beneath the onslaught of the relic's energy. The shadowy figure staggered back, a scream of rage tearing through the chamber. "No!" it screamed. "You cannot break the seal. You cannot." But Illyra and Vela were not listening. The darkness, the suffocating weight of the curse that had plagued their family for generations, was being torn away, piece by piece. The relic burned with a fierce, pulsing light, and the stone beneath their feet began to crack as though the earth itself were shattering under the power of the breaking seal. The chambers seemed to shake, the air vibrating with the force of the relic's power. The figure screamed, its voice a deafening wail. But the relic's light only grew brighter, its energy expanding, breaking through the very fabric of the curse. And then, with a final, blinding flash, the figure, The shadow was gone. The chamber fell silent. For a long moment, Elira and Vela stood in the ruins of the broken seal, the power of the relic still crackling in the air around them. The temperature began to rise, the oppressive weight of the darkness lifting from their chests as the air seemed to clear, to breathe again. Elira's heart slowed, her breath steadying as she looked at her sister, their hands still gripping the relic, its power now spent. The curse was broken. The bloodline had been severed. But as they stood there, in the aftermath of their struggle, they both knew that their lives would never be the same. They had broken the seal, but something had changed. Something had shifted within them. The remnants of the curse, the shadow of their father's pact, lingered in the air, a faint echo of what they had been. And though they had freed themselves from the past, they could never fully escape it. The legacy of their family would live on, but it would no longer define them. They were free, and in the silence that followed, they understood. The curse had been broken, but the true cost of their freedom had yet to be revealed. The air was still, too still. The shadows that once filled the church and the hollow were now gone, scattered like dust in the wind. And with their disappearance came a dreadful emptiness. The silence was almost deafening, louder than the screams they had once heard, louder than the dark murmurs of voices they could never truly understand. In the aftermath of the relics, destruction. In the final breaking of the seal that had bound them, Elira and Vela stood amidst the ruins of their past, surrounded by an oppressive calm that felt like the deep breath before an inevitable storm. Vela let out a shaky sigh, her hands trembling as they fell to her sides. "Is it really over?" she asked softly, her voice breaking the unnatural stillness. Elira looked around the church, her eyes scanning the darkened corners, half expecting the shadows to return, half expecting something darker to emerge from the cracks in the earth, to reach out and claim them both. But all that remained was the wreckage of their struggle. The shattered stone, the remnants of the seal, the empty space where the presence of their father's curse had once loomed so close. "I don't know," Elira murmured, though her voice was steadier than she felt. The relic still pulsed softly in her hand, its light dimming, but the energy was unmistakable. "But something's wrong. It doesn't feel like freedom." Vela's eyes flickered with a quiet dread. She had been the one to push forward, to follow her sister into the heart of their torment. But now, after everything they had endured, it was hard to shake the feeling that the cost of their freedom had been far greater than they realized. "What do you mean?" she asked, though she too could feel it, deep within her bones, a whisper of unease that seemed to echo in the silence. "I can't explain it," Elira said, her brow furrowing. "But it feels like we've opened something we shouldn't have. A door. A door we can't close." Vela glanced at the relic in her sister's hand, her eyes narrowing. She couldn't shake the thought that they had released something, a force far greater than the curse itself. A force that had been waiting, patient, behind the walls of the seal, waiting for the moment when they would break it open. What had they truly unleashed? "I think we need to leave," Vela said quietly, taking a cautious step backward. "Now." Before she could finish her sentence, a sound, a low, insistent hum, began to fill the air. It was barely perceptible at first, a vibration in the very walls of the church. But as it grew louder, it became impossible to ignore. It was a sound like the ticking of a clock, the beat of a heart, a pulse in the earth that seemed to reverberate through their bodies, deep into their bones. The relic in Elira's hand began to tremble, its light flickering erratically. The shadows in the room, once banished by the relic's power, now began to shift, creeping back into the corners like the return of a forgotten nightmare. The darkness no longer seemed distant. It was close, too close. They could feel it pressing in on them, closing in around them like a tightening vice. "No," Elira whispered, her eyes wide with horror. "No, it can't be." But even as the words left her lips, she knew. They had not broken the curse. They had not severed the bond. Instead, they had tapped into something far more terrifying, something ancient and incomprehensible. They had disturbed the balance that had kept the darkness at bay. And now, it was coming for them. Vela turned sharply, her breath quickening, her hand reaching for her sister's arm. "Elira, what's happening?" The hum grew louder, and with it came the sound of something else. A scraping, dragging sound, like nails on stone, like something ancient and dead crawling from the depths. The walls seemed to shake, and the ground beneath their feet rumbled as though the earth itself was shifting, rebelling against the disruption they had caused. A figure stepped from the shadows, moving slowly at first, its form indistinct in the dim light. As it emerged from the blackness, it took shape. A twisted, contorted silhouette, bent and broken like something half-formed, like a half-remembered nightmare. Its face, if it could be called a face, was nothing more than a black void, empty and consuming, a hollow space where eyes should have been. It wore the shape of a man, but there was nothing human in its presence. It was a thing born of the shadows, and it was moving toward them, its form undulating like smoke, like the darkness itself had taken on a shape. Elira froze, the relic still trembling in her hands. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "I don't know," Vela whispered back, her voice shaking with fear. "But it's not real." "It's real," Elira whispered, her voice breaking. "It's real." The figure reached out toward them, its fingers long and skeletal like claws, extending from the darkness. As it came closer, Elira could feel it, a pressure, a crushing force that seemed to seep open to her very soul. The air around them grew heavy, thick with something dark and malevolent. She could feel her limbs growing heavier, her thoughts clouded, as though something was pulling her down, dragging her into a place from which she could never return. The figure's voice, when it spoke, was not a voice at all. It was a sensation, a feeling, a presence that filled the air around them, wrapping itself around their minds like a vice. "You have released me," it whispered, though the words were not spoken aloud. They were felt deep inside their minds, like a cold, insistent whisper. "You thought you could break the chains, but you have only opened the door. The seal is broken, and now you belong to me." Elira's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the darkness pressing in, overwhelming her, filling her with dread, with terror. This was not a spirit. This was not a curse. This was something older, something far more dangerous than anything they had ever imagined. "No!" Vela shouted, her voice trembling with panic. "We didn't mean to. We didn't know." "You knew," the figure whispered, its form flickering like a flame in the wind. "You knew what you were doing. The bloodline was never meant to be freed. You have disturbed the equilibrium, and now you will pay the price." The air around them seemed to freeze, the temperature dropping sharply as the figure moved closer, its shadowy form stretching toward them, like something reaching from the abyss. The chamber seemed to narrow, closing in around them, the walls bending inward, the light flickering. "Elira," Vela cried, her voice desperate. "We have to run. We have to—" But Elira couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, her body heavy with the weight of the darkness that pressed against her, pushing her down, suffocating her. She could hear the whispers again, those same voices that had followed them, urging her forward, pulling her deeper into the darkness. "Elira, we need to leave," Vela shouted, shaking her sister by the shoulders. "Please, we need to get out of here." But it was too late. The darkness had already claimed them. And as the figure moved closer, its fingers reaching out to drag them into the abyss, Elira understood, in the deepest part of her soul, that there was no escaping it. There was no escape from the madness they had unleashed. There was only the descent. The darkness consumed them. The last remnants of light, the fragile remnants of their former world, flickered and died as the shadow wrapped itself around them, swallowing the sisters whole. Elira felt herself being drawn into it, her vision narrowing to the blackness that surrounded her. It was like drowning, but without the relief of water, a crushing, suffocating force that pressed in on her from all sides. She could still hear Vela's frantic voice, distant and muffled, but it was swallowed by the overwhelming silence, the deep, unnatural hum that filled the space around them. There was no escape. They had been wrong. They had thought that breaking the seal would free them, would sever the ties of their cursed bloodline. But they had been wrong. In seeking freedom, they had opened the door to something far worse, far more powerful. The curse wasn't just something that had been placed on them. It was a part of them, something that had always been within them, growing, festering, and now it had found a new way to consume them. The figure? No, the thing that had once been a twisted reflection of their father, moved like a shadow, its presence overwhelming, smothering everything. It was not bound by the laws of the physical world. It was a force of nature, a thing born from the darkness between worlds. It had no form, no face, only the sensation of being watched, the suffocating feeling of something ancient and unknowable, pressing down on them with a weight that threatened to crush their spirits. Elira. Vela's voice came again, quieter this time, strained. Her sister's name was a prayer, a desperate cry for help, but the terror in it only mirrored Elira's own. They were trapped, unable to move, unable to escape. The figure's whispers slithered through the air, filling their minds, making their thoughts heavy, as if their very wills were being drained from them. You cannot undo what has been done. You cannot escape the blood that binds you. The seal was not meant to be broken. You were never meant to be free. Elira's breath hitched in her chest as the voice echoed in her mind. It was not just a whisper. It was a command, a truth, an overwhelming certainty that wrapped itself around her heart and squeezed. The darkness pressed tighter, pulling her deeper into the void, into the very heart of the curse she had hoped to destroy. And yet, as much as she wanted to fight, as much as she wanted to scream, she felt the pull of the curse, the call of the bloodline. There was something undeniable about it. Something in her that answered the call. Something that was as much a part of her as her breath, her pulse, her heartbeat. Vela's hand reached out, grasping Elira's, her fingers trembling. "We have to fight this," she whispered, her voice filled with the same fear Elira felt. "We can't give in." But how could they fight something like this? How could they fight an entity that wasn't just a thing, but a force, a presence that was as old as time itself, as old as their bloodline? It was not something they could fight with strength or will. It was a part of them, a part of the world that had always existed, a part that could not be erased. "Elira, listen to me." Bela's voice was more forceful now. We can't let it take us. We're stronger than this. We've been through so much already. We can't. But before she could finish, the world around them seemed to shudder, like the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. Elira's vision blurred as the air around them grew thick with a darkness that seemed to boil and writhe, twisting into shapes that were impossible to describe. The walls of the church vanished, the stone floor crumbling beneath their feet, and in their place was a vast, endless expanse of shadow, a void that stretched beyond comprehension. The air was suffocating, the darkness swallowing everything in its path, leaving nothing but the oppressive weight of its presence. It was in this void that Elira understood. The curse was not a thing of the past. It was alive. It was a force that had been passed down through their family for generations, an ancient power that could not be destroyed because it was part of the very fabric of their blood. It had always been with them, waiting, lurking beneath the surface. And now, in their moment of weakness, it had risen to claim them. This wasn't just about breaking a pact. This was about survival. This was about the very essence of their being. The curse had always been with them, and now it was taking its rightful place, reclaiming what was always meant to be its. Elira, we can't let it win. Bela's voice broke through the fog of her thoughts, her grip tightening around her sister's hand. We're not just the daughters of this curse. We can choose who we become. We can choose who we are. But how? How could they fight this? How could they fight a darkness that was not a force to be vanquished, but a part of them, a part of their blood, their very soul? And then, just as quickly as the void had consumed them, a light, weak and distant, flashed in the corner of Elira's vision. It was small, fragile, but it was there. A flicker of something that was not part of the darkness, not part of the curse. It was hope. It was the relic that had been used to break the seal, to release the darkness in the first place, now pulsed faintly in Elira's hand. It was still alive, still responding to her. There was power in it. Not the same power that had bound them, but a different kind of power, one that came from within. It was not the darkness that had bound their family. It was their blood, their will to survive. Bela's eyes locked onto the relic, and Elira could feel the connection between them, the shared understanding. The relic, despite everything, was not merely a vessel of the curse. It had been a part of their family's history, yes, but it had also been a part of their survival. The bloodline could be broken, but not by destroying their past. They needed to turn the power of the curse back on itself. The darkness began to close in again, a final attempt to claim them, to pull them into its void. But this time, Elira didn't hesitate. With a desperate cry, she held the relic high above her head, the light from it flickering and growing brighter with each passing second. The power of their family, of their blood, began to flow into it, channeling through her hands, through the relic, and into the very heart of the darkness. No! The figure screamed, its voice now a shriek of pure rage. You cannot escape. You cannot. But Elira and Bela did not listen. Together, they focused, their combined strength, their wills united, pouring into the relic. The light blazed, a blinding flash that cut through the darkness like a sword. The void began to warp, to crack and splinter, the dark figure twisting and writhing as though it were being torn apart. And then, in one final, heart-stopping moment, the darkness shattered. The figure screamed one last time, its voice a terrible wail that echoed in the void, but it was gone. The pressure, the weight, the suffocating force that had held them was gone. The light slowly dimmed, and as Elira and Vela collapsed to their knees, gasping for breath, they realized that they were no longer in the void. The church was back around them, the walls intact, the air clear. But everything had changed. The curse had been broken, the bloodline severed. But the cost was more than they had ever imagined. The darkness that had once consumed them was now a part of them. They had fought it, yes, but in doing so, they had become something different, something forever marked by the shadows of their past. And as they stood there, in the remains of the place where their nightmare had begun, they knew one thing for certain. They were free, yes, but they would never be the same. The church, now quiet and still, seemed almost as if it had never been touched by the shadows that had consumed it just moments before. The air around Elira and Vela was heavy, thick with the remnants of the darkness that had once swirled around them, choking the very life from their spirits. Yet, as they stood together in the heart of this place, their breaths shallow, their bodies trembling from the force of what had happened, they could sense that something had irrevocably changed. The very world around them felt different, as if they had stepped through a door that would never open again, as if the fabric of their existence had been torn, frayed, and mended in a way that could never be undone. The relic, once a glowing symbol of their curse, now lay dim and lifeless in Elira's hand. She could feel the faint pulse of its energy, as though it had been drained, its power spent, its purpose fulfilled. The darkness that had followed them, that had shaped their family's history, had been cast out, but not without leaving its mark. They had broken the bloodline's hold, severed the ties that bound them to the past, but at a terrible cost. And now, standing in the quiet aftermath, Elira and Vela could only wonder what would come next. What life awaited them after the battle, after the bloodshed, after the final echo of the curse's retreat. Vela took a hesitant step toward her sister, her voice hoarse as she spoke, her words lingering in the air like a question that had yet to be answered. "Elira, is it really over?" Elira's gaze drifted to the relic in her hand, the weight of it now a reminder of everything they had fought for and everything they had lost. The battle had been won, yes, but the price they had paid had yet to fully settle within her heart. She could still feel the darkness, a faint echo of it lingering beneath her skin, in her soul. It had been broken, yes, but had it really been eradicated? Or had it simply transformed into something new, something unrecognizable, something that would follow them for the rest of their lives? "I don't know," Elira said, her voice softer than it had ever been before. "I think it is, but I don't think we'll ever be free of it. Not completely. The bloodline is gone, yes. The curse, the force that had kept us bound to it, has been severed. But something of it still lingers. We've been marked by it, Vela. We always will be." Vela stepped closer, her hands trembling as she reached out, touching her sister's arm. "But we're free now. We can live. We can—" "I don't know what kind of life we'll have," Elira interrupted, her voice suddenly hard. "The curse has left its mark, its stain. We may have broken its hold, but that doesn't mean it's gone. The force that held us, it's not just something external. It's a part of us now. And we have to live with that. We can't escape it. We can't outrun it." The weight of Elira's words settled between them, heavy and suffocating. The idea of freedom, of a life untouched by the shadow of their bloodline, seemed so far away, so unreachable now. They had won, yes, but the victory felt hollow, like a dream slipping through their fingers. Vela opened her mouth to say something, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say? What comfort could she offer when Elira was right? The darkness, the curse, had been woven into their lives so tightly, so deeply, that even after the last remnants of it had been cast out, it still lingered, a ghost that would never leave. They could not escape the past. They could not escape who they were. The silence between them stretched, thick and heavy, as they stood in the heart of the church, the echoes of their battle still reverberating in the walls. The scent of decay had long since dissipated, but something else had replaced it, a strange sense of finality, a coldness that settled in the pit of their stomachs. It was as though they had crossed a threshold, not into freedom, but into something darker, something they had not been prepared for. What now? Vela asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. Elira closed her eyes, her thoughts swirling like a storm within her mind. She didn't have an answer. She had hoped, prayed, that the curse would simply end, that the world would right itself, that they would be able to walk away, free of the burden their father had placed upon them. But now, with the silence pressing in around them, Elira realized the truth. They were not free. They were no longer bound to the curse, but they were not untouched by it either. The darkness had been a part of them, a part of their bloodline, for so long that even after its destruction, they were left with its echo, its shadow. We move forward, Elira said at last, her voice steady but filled with a quiet resolve. We don't get to choose what happens next, but we can choose how we face it. Vela nodded slowly, her eyes filling with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. She had fought alongside her sister, had struggled through the darkness, and now, with the weight of everything that had transpired, she could see that the only path forward was one of acceptance. They couldn't change the past. They couldn't undo the decisions that had led them here. But they could decide who they would become. They could decide what they would do with the remnants of their curse, with the knowledge that they had faced it and survived. The silence in the church was no longer oppressive. It was calm, almost peaceful, as though the world had exhaled, as though the earth had accepted their struggle, their defiance. The bloodline was gone. The curse had been broken. But the journey ahead was uncertain, and the road would be difficult. Elira turned to her sister, her eyes softening. We don't have to know all the answers, Vela. We just have to keep moving. Vela smiled faintly, her face tired but full of a quiet understanding. Together, she said, her voice stronger now. We'll move forward. Together. And with that, the two sisters stepped forward, their hands still clasped tightly together. The church around them, once a place of darkness and dread, now felt like a place of transition, a place where they had been forged, where they had faced the very heart of the curse that had ruled their lives. It was a place of endings, yes, but also a place of beginnings. The sun had begun to rise, its pale light filtering through the broken windows of the church, casting long shadows on the floor. The light seemed to warm the stone beneath their feet, and as the sisters stepped into the sunlight, they felt something stir within them, a flicker of hope, a spark of something new. They had faced the darkness. They had broken the curse, and now they would face whatever came next. Not as the daughters of the curse, but as survivors, as women who had chosen their own fate, who had chosen to step into the light. And as they walked out of the church, leaving behind the ruins of their past, Elira knew one thing for certain. The road ahead would be long and uncertain. but it was theirs to walk, and for the first time in their lives, they were free to choose which path to take. And that was enough.